Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of the Corruption Files on YouTube. My name is Jeremy Maddock. I'm joined again by my co-host, Jamie J., who always adds helpful psychological and human insights to my legal and political pursuits. You want to introduce yourself, Jamie?
Hi, my name's Jamie. I'm just an avid researcher of all things psychological, social research, social psychology. So yeah, I have a pretty broad generalist background and just really have a heart for what's right and for justice. And so any type of issues that come up that involves these type of topics or virtues, I'm always interested to research, understand them, and advocate on people's behalf for just fairness and justice in our society.
Okay, thank you. We've done a couple of shows together already. I think our last one was about the removal of statues and monuments. And we talked a lot about crowd psychology, about mob mentality, and about how that interacts with our legal and political system. And following on that, we have another very topical show today. And Jamie joined me on very short notice for this one because it's something that came up in our community here in Victoria and really across Canada over the last day on September 20th, 2023, there was a event called the 1 Million March for Children. And the idea here was for parents and for just concerned citizens to stand up and march for the rights of children, to have a safe learning environment, and to be not subject to extreme ideology. I guess gender ideology was the concern. I'm joined today. We've got a special guest on today, Candace Chappell, who's a local activist and a person with great political interest who's been very involved and always seems to have her finger on the pulse of what's happening. She's joining us today from her car, but she's in Victoria, I believe, and she wants to talk a little bit about her experience at the event yesterday and what she remembers. First of all, Candace, just introduce yourself and let us know what made you want to go to this event.
Well, what made me want to go to this event is that it has, through some of my activism groups, I've gotten to know parents who've expressed, I'm not a parent myself, but I've gotten to know parents who've expressed some concerns over some of the gender ideology, curriculum and ideas that are being introduced to kids. And one of the speakers at yesterday's rally or march is someone that I consider a friend, Serena Winterburn. She was speaking, as well as I was interested to, having recently discovered about Megan. I wanted to hear Megan speak, and I've also previously heard Cam speak, and I really value what they say as parents. And I would like to know just, a little bit more. And so I was attending the march for that reason. I do have a lot of concerns, as I have started to notice in our local area here, more and more kids choosing to identify as the opposite gender or as something that's not really like a gender, just various pronouns. And I think that's all fine for people to do what they want, but as soon as you sort of start crossing the line where you're asking me to play along, I have some hesitation if it's not something I want to play along with. So just wanting a deeper knowledge on the topic, I wanted to go to listen to the speakers yesterday at the event, and that just wasn't unfortunately made possible because they were drowned out by, I guess, counter protesters. Although I hesitate to call them that because I feel like what they were protesting didn't have really any relevance to what we were there to hear. They were saying things that didn't really align to, we were there to discuss parents' rights and how they fit in with their, what's going on with gender ideology teachings in schools and where parents fit into that. And instead, it seemed to be that the counter protesters were there to say things like, um, trans lives matter, which of course nobody is denying. Of course, like all lives matter, all children's lives matter. So it just seemed that there was a bit of a mix up in even their understanding of what we were there to discuss.
Yeah, and again, this follows very logically from our last episode. We talked about the whole question of Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter, and whether you're allowed to say All Lives Matter. It seems to me that that dividing and excluding people is a way of perpetuating hatred, perpetuating bullying. When you say that some lives matter more than other lives, and it creates silos of people. So that's always been my concern. I think I was impressed when I was at the beginning of this event when I went also to hear the speakers. I was curious to see how it would play out and what would happen. I was really impressed with Serena Winterburn and her way of introducing it to the crowd. She put forward a really conciliatory, unifying message about how we want a conversation. We want parents to be sitting down across the table from people of all walks of life, whether there's Christian families or Muslim families or transgendered families, and how these people should be able to interact and have a conversation and make a safe environment for everybody where there genuinely isn't any bullying. I heard that from Serena. I heard that very, very sincerely from Serena. Like I think she was genuinely trying to show the crowd, including the counter protesters, as some call them, that this is not an event to bully them. This is an event to start a conversation, a difficult conversation, a controversial conversation, but this is a way of bringing people together, not driving people apart. So I agree. I was encouraged by that message, but I was really discouraged by what I saw when the so-called counter protesters. There were 2,500 people in total at the event. I would say a large percentage, if not the majority of them, were counter protesters, and we felt kind of outnumbered. I think those of us who were there to hear the speakers, because they were just so loud. They were very angry. They were screaming. Some of them started to rush the stage, stand around the speaker, make it impossible to hear the speaker. And it was really, their goal obviously was to prevent peaceful assembly, was to prevent speakers from being heard. And just to show a flavor of what happened, I want to show a quick little clip that's been circulated a lot on Twitter and on some news outlets, I think, of what happened just from the organizers' perspective as this violence was unfolding at the right by the side of the stage, and then how the police reacted to that. Because unfortunately, the police decided that the speakers, they backed down to the violence, and the police decided that the speakers had to stop speaking, even to the point of threatening to unplug the microphone. So I'm just going to share my screen for a moment here. Bear with me and play a little video. And Jamie, I think this is your first time seeing this, so I'll be interested in your comments and Candace's comments on what really happened here. Can you guys see my screen? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
Black women, it is possible to be born in your own body. It says you go a woman to the male and that woman can be the woman who has the right to be there. And the teacher is in fact the only one that you feel unsafe. This is what I know. This is what
Now, give us a moment. We're being asked to shut down by the police who are telling us about so much violence that's happening out in front of the state. Now, they will unplug everything so I can. So I'm unplugging the speeches right now while this conference. Turn it off, or I'm watching over there right now. Right now. Okay, no, yeah. Come on. I want to hear this stop. I want to hear this stop, and we can stop. Yeah, we're gonna do it. We're gonna do it. We're gonna do it. We're gonna shut it off. Don't make an announcement. Don't make an announcement that we have to stop. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, beautiful souls, we're gonna ask you to take a moment to each step into silence and prayer while we take the mic off for a moment. There's a lot going on and we need to ensure your safety, everybody's here's safety. And so we're being asked right now that first and foremost, your safety as our community is what matters. And I know that you can understand that. Thank you for carrying in your hearts today what we have. Do not disperse yet. Keep yourself safe. Do not isolate yourself. Stick together. Remember why we're here. Be the embodiment of love. Do not be goaded in. Do not take that. We love you. We will be with you. Be safe. Remember, good men and women have stood for less. Okay.
Okay, yeah. Dave! 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 Kill it! It's off. It's off.
Okay, that was quite a scene there. I think we might have lost Candace. I think she disconnected for a moment. I'll see if I can get her back. Jamie, what are your thoughts on that? What we just saw?
I personally just feel personally triggered when I just see police really you know, just basically being an instrument of one political side of an ideology instead of ensuring everybody's safety. And it's interesting that they decided to shut down the peaceful people in order to achieve safety rather than shutting down people that were being aggressive and violent in order to ensure safety. And so, I mean, it's pretty clear that that officer, you know, already had his mind made up as to who he was going to shut down. And that's, to me, just like, just upsetting to me to even have to watch. But, you know, really the thoughts that come to my mind right away is that I think that the people that showed up to counter protest this actually would consider this a success in that they were able to shut down their opposers' opportunity to express an opposing view. I'm very well read in the philosophy of anarchism, which a lot of people are programmed to believe that that word is associated with such groups as Antifa or other kind of radical groups. But if you actually understand what philosophical anarchy is, it's really understanding the autonomy of the individual and that everything should be done voluntarily and that you shouldn't actually infringe others' rights. You only have a right to self-defense if your rights are being infringed. That's a really basic example. And a lot of these groups will try to use language associated with anarchist philosophy, such as saying that children have gender autonomy and using words, you know, such as autonomy to say that they are trying to advocate for the rights of the individual. And I just want to kind of call that out because in reality, if they were actually promoting these virtues of, you know, autonomy or voluntarism or things like that, they would allow for opposing views to have the same rights they would have. And what we see played out here is that these people believe that they are right, and therefore anybody with an opposing view to them is wrong, and that they actually don't have the right to have an opposing view expressed, verbalized, communicated, or made public, which is really scary because, like I said, it's almost like algebra where you could put either group on the side of that equation and you can switch them around, but it's the equation itself that's really scary because it's always going to be better for the one person on the one end and better and not good for the person on the other end. And we see with LGBT and trans rights and stuff, at one point in history, they were persecuted, right? And so now that not only have they achieved rights, but actually privilege, now there's not even extended the same type of, you know, respect for the individual that was being fought for in the first place, which is to have autonomy over your own decisions. So I think when people have protests like this, they go down there and it actually serves a purpose for them because they feel entitled to retaliate for some type of perceived persecution. And so it actually allows them to express, you know, this kind of persecuted, retaliation towards people they feel are being perpetrators against them. But unfortunately, if they would have allowed people to speak and, like you said, sat at a table and allowed people to actually express their view, and if they would have actually listened to it and tried to understand it, even if they don't agree, then there would have been a whole different level of communication, and they wouldn't have felt persecuted because they would understand that these people are not trying to persecute anybody. They're actually fighting for the same philosophical principles that these people claim to advocate for, which is autonomy, which is the rights of the individual, which is things being done voluntarily, which is not forcing other people to your view. But again, we see this kind of played out in society where people think as long as they're right, that doesn't apply. But unfortunately, everybody thinks they're right. So people that are advocates of this whole agenda actually believe that they're right. They don't believe it's just their opinion or how they feel. They actually feel like they're right and the other people are wrong. And so that is where it becomes a really dangerous area at all, because it's one group that can force their views on the other. And with children are basically in a hypnotic state until the age of 7. They're highly suggestible. There's a power differential of adults over them. They're easily influenced. And so the people that are fighting against this stuff in schools are not trying to stop any of the people in the counter protests from having their autonomy or their opinions or their rights or whatever they want to do. All they're saying is that children should actually be allowed to have a sacred time of innocence and childhood where these things are not being pressured on them to ask. They can explore on their own. It's not the role of the school at all, in my opinion. Like, school should be there basically to teach actual skills. And it's I know there's going to be a degree of socialization in a civilized society, but the thing is that with the internet now, people can find information on their own when they're ready to access that information. So introducing information to children at an age when they weren't thinking about it already is actually what people have a problem with. And that's where the abuse is, because they're introducing topics that are not appropriate for children at an age when they aren't thinking of it already. They're introducing the ideas into their mind. That's what people have a problem with. And if people in the counter protest would have allowed people to speak, they might actually agree with that on one level. Like, if they could really understand where people are coming from and understand that these people are not trying to stop any of these people from doing what they want. And that same respect just really wasn't extended at this protest from what I can see. And that is really, really scary and dangerous to me. I just because, like I said, either group can be on the if you think of a teeter-totter, either group can be on the high end, right? And it's really, really scary if things aren't equal all the time for people's rights, regardless of who they are, what their beliefs are.
Yeah, it's when you talk about socialization and just, I guess, good manners, for lack of a better term, the counter protesters certainly didn't have that. And I didn't see any of the parents or the people at the march behaving at all hatefully. I didn't see any raised voices or any kind of anger, but I saw so much anger coming from the other side, coming from those who were counter protesting. I've got Candace calling back in. I think she's hopefully resolved her tech problems. Yeah, I see her popping back onto Zoom. So I'm hoping.
Hi.
Hi, Candace. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
All good. No worries. You're back just in time. And what we'd like to hear, if you could, and I mean the main reason why I think it's valuable to get your perspective is to hear about what went on after this. The mic was pulled. The police said shut down the rally. Of course, a number of parents and concerned citizens did carry on and stayed. And I was really disgusted. I was really worried by the level of anger there. And frankly, I left in disgust after I saw what happened. But a few brave people stayed on. Candace, you were one of those. Why don't you tell us what you saw? You kind of summarized it in a message to me last night. But why don't you just summarize for our audience what you saw, what happened afterwards?
Yeah, so at first I just, stayed. I actually didn't see the arrest, which is quite interesting because I was standing right beside it based on what I saw on the news. I didn't see the person charging the stage and getting tackled, but I just heard Serena saying they were shutting it down. And then I later saw on the news that, police made them And I also didn't realize that somebody had been, I could see there was a kerfuffle, but I didn't realize what had gone on. There was a lot of police and a lot of people. And so because I was standing right in front of the stage, I just sort of turned towards the crowd, which kept sort of closing in on us, getting closer and closer and closer. And there was myself and another man who was there to hear the speaker speak. He actually was using a cane, and they kept encroaching on us. And I just wanted to make sure that the organizers had a chance to clean up all of the equipment and get out of there before, these guys kind of swarmed it, because I was worried that they might wreck the stuff or whatever. So I was just kind of standing there doing that, and the police were around too, holding the line. And then it sort of like moved forward, was moving in a different direction. So I actually circled around and I went in and was talking to people that I knew over on that side. And next thing I know, I look around and we've been kind of like completely blocked in. They've closed in on us, the counter protesters, all the way around, and police have formed a line in front of them. So we were circled. And then I started to get a little miffed, because I was annoyed and I was shocked at how, what these kids, most of them were kids, not all, but many of them were. I say kids, I mean like college students, university students, and high school students, I imagine. And then there was just a few, adults and stuff, older people in the crowd. And I started to get really upset at that point, because they were saying, "Go home, transphobes, go home, transphobes." And I was like, this is our event. Like, what do you mean go home? Like, I'm here to have to listen to the speakers. Like, this was our event. We had a permit for the event. And I was questioning police, like, why didn't they protect us? Like, why didn't they barricade it off? Why didn't they keep the crowd away and let us have our event? And they just, oh, there's more of us than them or whatever. As somebody pointed out, though, they sure didn't have any trouble keeping the truckers away. So yeah, I just thought that seemed a bit suspect, that they weren't able to keep the group back from us. And as I stood there, kind of in just disbelief, listening to all the horrible name calling that these young people were shouting at us, and there were many people more senior than me standing there, some very elderly people. And I just remember being like, who talks to, their elders in such a way? And just screaming obscenities at us and accusing us of all kinds of things without knowing me at all. And yeah, I was pretty disheartened to see. And there was a few occasions where we had an opportunity to try and say something, especially when the group would be chanting. They would chant different slogans together. Someone with a bullhorn would yell out what to say, and everybody would follow suit. And one of those was, trans kids' lives matter. And we didn't deny that at all. We said, yes, we agree, absolutely, trans kids' lives matter. And nobody's saying that they don't. And that seemed just send them off the deep end, just screaming. Many of them wore masks, and like their mask was almost getting sucked into their mouths. They were so angry, and just the vitriol. And I just couldn't understand why they were so angry. I just didn't understand what was causing this. And then actually one of the people that were sort of standing on our side, if that's what you want to call it, within the circle, there was a woman. She had pulled her daughter out of school. She was maybe 14. She showed me a video saying that at her school in Esquimalt High, a teacher had actually been going around hanging posters that day telling students to go and counter protest. And in solidarity or whatever, the school actually, and she showed me the video, lowered the Canadian flag and hoisted the pride flag as part of this. So the students, somebody else told me that the reason that it seemed to grow towards the later part of the day was that students were coming from Camosun and UVic, and had also been told to come and join the counter protest. So it sounds like to me the schools were behind this. The the sheer size and the anger and everything else. Like, these kids felt they were totally in the right to be there talking to us that way.
So to be clear, the Million March, the original protest, was shrinking in size as people left, and the counter protest
Yes.
was growing in size, and the counter
Yes.
protest had surrounded the initial protest. And would you
Yes.
say that the vitriol was getting stronger over the afternoon, or how was it, like, how was this progressing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They were so mad that we wouldn't just do what they said and leave. And that would just seem to anger them more and more. And they started closing in on us and closing in on us. So the police were moving towards us. And at one point, an elderly gentleman in our group, a senior man, he refused to move back as the police kind of tried to push us back. And he was like, no, push them back. Tell them to leave. Tell them to disperse. Why are you encroaching on us? And they were like, well, there's more of them than you. And I was like, you haven't even tried. You haven't even turned and said to them, go home yourselves, disperse. And he's like, and then that's when one police said, well, we're not trying to tell you to go home either. But that's not true. We'd already had policemen come up there to us and tell us that we should leave, and they would escort us out. And they couldn't, if we continued to stay, they had every police officer in town there, and they would abandon us. They would leave. They would no longer be there to protect us. And that really concerned me.
How did that make you feel, the idea of being abandoned to this crowd? Was that a worry to you?
Yeah, so one of the things that I do frequently is go to these little local cafes. There's a couple of them in particular that I really like. I'm vegan, and many of these little locally owned cafes are places that I frequent. And in the crowd, there was two of these cafes. There was employees from both of them, and they recognized me. And without, attempting to talk to me in any way, I wasn't carrying a sign. I was just wearing my regular street clothes. I just was in the middle, screaming at me, "What are you doing here, Candace?" And I said, "I am here uh, to defend parental rights." And that seemed to really miff them. And next thing I know, they're swearing at me, they're fingering me, they're shouting obscenities at me, using the F word. These were young people that, I feel I've had good rapport with, that I have no animosity with. And I'm also a regular customer in their stores and spend a lot of money there and tip them very well. So I was kind of in disbelief that I was getting that. And next thing I know, the crowd is chanting my name. Go home, Candace, and all this, because they've shared my name with the crowd. So now it's a personal thing with me. And I look in the crowd and I'm getting stared down and getting fingers. A lot of them are in masks, so you can't totally see their face. You can completely see mine. And, I would smile and stuff. And it just seemed to agitate them more when I was trying to be reasonable. And I just said, I'm there for parental rights. And when they argued about things, I said, anybody that tells you that your parents don't need to be involved in a conversation, that's a red flag. That's not right. Parents need to be involved in your lives. You need to run things past them. And schools don't have the authority to keep secrets from your parents. And, I would hear in response, students, kids have autonomy too. And all this. And I said, well, I believe that when you're under your parents' roof, you talk to your parents. You don't, it's a slippery slope if you've got your student or schools keeping secrets from your parents. So let's talk about that.
And you tried to have a conversation, and I take it there were no takers in the crowd.
They would huff at me and wave their hand. They just didn't want to hear it. They didn't want to hear it. So they had decided that I held all of these really terrible views and, called us all kinds of things, every name under the sun.
So just to like, in terms of your attitude going forward from this, how does this make you feel about the city that we live in? We live in Victoria. It's known as a progressive city. It's known as a place where people generally get along. People are generally pretty tolerant of one another. is the idea of Victoria. Does this sort of shatter that vision for you, or how do you feel about like living in this community going forward, going to those cafes going forward, running into some of these same people? Are you worried?
I'm definitely concerned because of the mob mentality that happened. Like I could be walking, you know, and who knows who wants to approach me. They scream right in your face. They like move right over you, cower right over you, like stand tall. I know a freelance journalist that went there. This went on last night till well past 9 p.m. So I left at 5. At 7:30, I drove by there. It was still going on. I drove by there again at 9 p.m. It was still happening, and there was a circle still, and I could hear them chanting with police on the outside, and it was dark at this point, and there were people in the middle. And all I could think is those people in the middle must have been there was about 3 senior citizens, one elderly lady sitting on the grass, refusing to leave. She was upset over something that I'm actually very upset about too, and want to know more about and understand, is why bathrooms at community centers and rec centers in Victoria and the greater area the signage is being changed from male and female to be all gender. So we are now sharing the washroom with men, and that goes for women and children, elderly women. We're in there with men, and I've had a few uncomfortable encounters already. I can't imagine as a parent I would feel safe to send my children to the washroom on their own anymore. I mean, it's just totally an invasion of our rights and our privacy and our dignity, and it's a hygienic issue and everything else. So it is not okay. So anyway, this elderly lady was sitting there on the grass. She was gonna refuse to leave. Like I did say to her when we were leaving, like, come with us. And she said, I will not leave. I will be here. If I'm here till tomorrow, I'm not leaving. And when the police were telling me that they were going to go, I said, well, you can't abandon her. And they said, well, she'll decide for herself when she wants to go. Well, I don't think they ever did, because I did see some police still there at 9 when I went by. But there was a circle still, and they were chanting. There were some young Muslim men who vowed to stay with this lady, with the senior ladies, as long as they stayed. So I can only imagine it was down to them at that hour. And then a freelance journalist friend of mine went by too around 7:30, and she saw another encounter where a guy was just there quietly holding a sign that said all kids' lives matter. And he was also encountered by a swarm, and it was a tall man. He was towering over him, trying to intimidate him. So intimidation is definitely their shtick. That's what they want to do. They want to scare us from speaking. They told me that they were taking videos of me. They were putting on social media. Yeah, all that kind of thing. So accusing me of taking pictures of children, trying to, just intimidate me and threaten me and make me feel bad or whatever.
Yeah, seems like there's a ton of bullying going on. I thought it was interesting the way that politicians responded to this.
I can't even read them. I get so upset.
Yeah, I mean, it like Justin Trudeau, for example, his response on Twitter was, let me make one thing clear: transphobia, homophobia, and biphobia have no place in this country. We strongly condemn this hate and its manifestations, and we stand united in support of 2S LGBTQI plus Canadians across the country. You are valid and you are valued. And then we've got David Eby, of course, the Premier of British Columbia, saying, without hesitation, I denounce threats, hate, and violence against 2S LGBTQIA plus communities. We are seeing a concerning rise in incidents where trans people are being targeted with threats and violence in person and online. We cannot and must not stand idly by in the face of any kind of bullying. Any political leader who targets our most vulnerable at-risk children and youth is no leader at all. This is remarkable to me that they're saying this as if the parents who are standing up for some kind of say in the school system and in the curriculum and just keeping the system accountable are the bullies, or are the people threatening someone, when it seems what I experienced on the ground and what you witnessed even more, Candace, shows the bullying is going entirely one way, and it's the the so-called trans community. And I wouldn't say it's all the trans community. I would say that
Definitely not. No.
there's many members of the trans community who would never bully anybody and just want to be left alone. And I certainly support them, and I think you support them too. But the fact that this extreme mob formed, and it seems like there was really no purpose for this mob except to bully. They weren't there to have a conversation. They weren't there to correct misconceptions. All I saw was wanting to get as big a number of people down there, promote their counter event, and then shout down the speakers and make sure that the other event got ruined. And right down to the point of you get to the last few people, and the last few people must have experienced such intense pressure, and really it's this kind of Orwellian idea of the ministry of peace being warlike, the ministry of truth being the propaganda ministry. Well, it's like the bullying is referred to as all coming from parents, when in fact it's going the other way. And our politicians, I don't know if they're just stupid or unaware, or they're not watching this, or if they're just trying to pull a propaganda move to make this whole issue into something it's not. But it's really gaslighting the population is the only way I can see it, when you have people who should really know better, regardless of ideology. I don't see eye to eye with Mr. Trudeau or Mr. Eby on a number of things, but if these are supposed to be our leaders, and these are supposed to be people who have a position of moral authority and should be able to say neither side should be bullying, let's have a conversation here, let's all be respectful to one another, and they can't say that. They can't rise above the fray and be statesmen. They have to be political opportunists and liars, and that really bothers me.
Yeah, they're fanning the flames of division, and they're doing it between kids and their own parents, which is like, that's scary. I mean, that's, state saying more about protecting kids from their own parents. Like, what's that about? And you've got the officials using language to divide, calling us hateful. And there was hate yesterday, and it was not coming from our side. And I just couldn't believe. I was like, where are these people's parents? Like, what emboldens them to behave this way? I can't even imagine behaving that way. With the values my parents raised me with, and talking to us the way that they did, talking to elders the way that they did. It's absolutely crazy to me. And I feel like the system is propping them up. There's teachers are propping them up. The education system, our officials, our elected officials are all propping them up with the language that they use, and they're making them the authority on everything. When did the youth become the authority on everything? What makes them so wise and all-knowing? We all grew up in times when none of this was even a thing. So we have a lot to learn if we're going to try and understand, why suddenly so many people are transing. Like, why is that such a huge issue? So let's talk about it, but we can't. There's no dialogue. There's just zero. They drown you out. They use noisemakers. They use the worst name calling that I've ever encountered in my life, to people who don't know me, or to people that actually, I thought I knew, and at least we were respectful members of our community. And, I've been told, don't come back to that cafe. Don't come there anymore.
Well,
and
that's sad to hear, but I guess one question, and I try to incorporate into these podcasts, because it can get kind of dark and depressing to think about how difficult it is to have a conversation. How do we have this conversation? I'm going to put that out to both of you, Candace. I know you've got an appointment in a few minutes, so maybe you go first, and Jamie as well. Like, how do we have this conversation in a civil way without sacrificing our values and without sacrificing civility, and maintain some level of order, and bring these people in for genuine dialogue?
I've noticed there are a couple people. We saw one now working. There's a transgender person out of Ottawa who's willing to sort of be a go-between, like wanting to, who sees things from both sides. Perhaps we could find somebody in our local community who could do that as well, help us bridge that divide a bit, because it just seems to be that that seems necessary. Somebody who can identify with the other side could help us have these conversations. You know, when we left the protest and we started to walk out, we were actually approached by some people who were like, were you guys in there? Wow, that's crazy. You're so brave. And we're shaking our hands. And one of those guys was introduced himself as a gay person who is not for the curriculum that is being taught. And he is not behind it. And he is not behind what the, you know, LGBTQ people are saying to us. So people like that might be our best bet at helping us bridge the gap, I guess, a little bit, have conversations. But I really don't know how we will, because it seems like our voices are just nothing to them. We're just as good as nothing. Like if they could, they would just wipe us off the face of the earth. So I don't know where we go from here. And as I say, when we have our officials backing that up, I mean, using the names that to say we're hateful people, why would anybody want to talk to us? You know, if we're just going to show up at the table and we're just so full of hate that,
Presumed
we might,
illegitimate by virtue of existing. That seems, and it's exactly what the other side, what the transgender community claim is being done to them, which isn't, at least not that I've seen in any of these events, and they are doing it to those who express concerns. And I would imagine somebody who is a member of the gay community who came forward and spoke out honestly and expressed a contrary point of view might be seen as sort of a traitor by these people, might be treated even worse, would be my concern for them. But I do think that there needs to be people who stand up and bridge this gap, because if society gets this polarized that people are screaming obscenities at each other and can't have a conversation, that's a real concern for our future as a society, and that affects everybody. Jamie, what do you think? Any insights arising from all this?
Yeah, I agree that we need mediation at this point, because there's obviously just not a level of maturity or intellect or, just even good naturedness for people to be able to, have that nonviolent communication where people can actually have a conversation and allow for space for people to be different. At this time, I don't see that available after the events last night. And like I said, I chose not to participate in any type of rallies like this, because I feel like it actually kind of creates this amplified, emotion that groups kind of need in order to legitimize this type of behavior. Like I think last night really was, what was wanted. And I feel that having the ability to use, force and aggression to shut something down really filled a deep-seated need to have power and domination over an opposing view in these people. And I feel that there might be other ways to go about things that aren't creating that opportunity for people to feel like they're getting into a ring and having a match, because I feel like there's a type of feeding that goes on off of that, that kind of, makes people feel really legitimized after they've shut the other person down, like it was some type of a zero-sum win-lose, event, right? And so, yeah, I think if there's other ways, which is probably not going to be in person in groups, because there's so much social contagion and so much emotion going on, that it's probably one of the least effective ways to have a conversation, just because of that emotional part, activating parts of the brains that's, going to shut off really logical parts of the brains. And that's very contagious when there's large groups of people around. That I think, obviously doing things like online seminars, like Zoom meetings where there's mediation and different people speaking, and that, people only have the time to speak where they can't cut other people off. And like, I feel like we do have some technological tools that can be used at this time, but this whole thing, it just really makes me sad that, this is the example that any adults are setting for children at this time. I just, I really hope that there's some peacemakers in the middle and some mediators that can come and sort of, from both sides of this and help to reconcile. Obviously people are all acting from their heart, but it's like people obviously just have different ideas at this time. But I think everybody's actually just trying to act from what they think is virtuous. So that's never going to be resolved without more conversation. And one of my favorite sayings is the answer to wrong speech is more speech. So if you really don't agree with somebody, then that's exactly why you should listen to what they have to say and let them express every single thing they have to say, so that you understand why they think what they think and how they think what they think and what they're thinking. So if you shut down speech, then you're actually keeping things exactly as they are. And that just doesn't work. Like, if they really truly don't think that our thinking is right, then they need to listen to our way of thinking in order to understand, in order to have a conversation, to possibly have an influence on a different way of thinking. And that goes for both sides. So any form of shutting down speech just keeps everybody in a state of ignorance. And that is not the way that humanity moves forward for anybody.
Yeah, there was an opportunity for dialogue, and yet it was squandered by the counter protesters. Frankly, I wish I could say it was balanced and equal on both sides, but it really, the counter protesters here were not willing to have that conversation. I think if some of the speakers had the opportunity to answer questions and be grilled on what they thought, that would have been a good teaching moment for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe for the speakers themselves would have changed their minds if they'd heard some sincere views of the other side. And it seems like in person, you say, Jamie, in person is too emotional, and maybe online would be a better format where you could have a more formal debate with time. And that in my experience, though, the really hard part of that is getting people to be there, because online social media is very polarizing as well, and sometimes people will only talk online to people who agree with them, and that's tough to get a forum that's seen as trusted for a debate, a genuine debate where people are going to be treated fairly. I'd love to facilitate that and make that possible if there was a way of doing it, but it's a real challenge. Anyway, Candace, I know you are likely right up against your appointment, so any closing thoughts that you have before we wrap this up, or what?
I would just like to express that, like, I'm really coming from a place of curiosity, compassion, and a desire to learn. I am prior to the last few years, I wasn't even political. So a lot of ways I still consider myself nonpartisan. I'm also, non-denominational. I'm not religious. And there's lots of accusations. It was actually one of the few things I responded to when a lady was screaming at us all for being about, priests and pastors and everything else, and things that, they've been have done in the past with kids and things. So I just said, first of all, it's not a good, because when we were discussing someone was discussing the safety of children, right, and like putting them, these are adult themes, and when you're introducing adult themes to children, you have to understand, you have to think, why do we want to introduce these themes, and who are these adults? Like, one of the things that they're always vehemently defending is story time by drag queens, and a lot of these stories are actually about kids that have thoughts about being other genders, and as we all know, children are very impressionable, and we have to think about the fact that a drag queen is just a man talking to children. And so why would you not vet a man who's going to come and talk to children? And you would generally do that, but it seems to me that as long as they're dressed, in a woman's caricature, it's okay. They can have full access to women. And so when that kind of debate comes up, they immediately defer, I find, to things like, oh, well, your faith is, in the past, like, there's been all these like things that have happened with children and molestation and stuff. And I was like, first of all, whataboutism doesn't work, because kids have been harmed in this way doesn't mean that kids are now okay to be harmed in this way. Like, it's a poor argument. And so I just want to make people aware that I'm actually just learning as I go. I didn't come to this with any prior thought, other than what I've seen transpiring in my own community over the last little while, particularly with, friends telling me that many of the kids are now calling themselves theys and thems at school. And I said, kind of surprised that teachers are entertaining that they're indulging that. And I thought, well, why would anybody do that? When I was a teenager, there was a boy I had a crush on, and I would sign my papers with his last name. And when the teacher would say, I would love to sign this girl, this person, this great mark that she got, but I don't have Candace Donaldson in the class, right? I have Candace Chapel. And so the teacher didn't indulge my little fantasy. Like, that's not what they're there to do. And if I want to do that on my own time, well, that's perfectly fine. But we find them indulging this stuff right now, and it just is something that I would like to understand a little bit better, because I'm not quite sure why, and I'm just here to learn and understand. So if people want to reach out respectfully, I'm here. I'm all ears, and but I won't listen to anybody who was attacking us with hate the way they were doing yesterday.
Any social media you want to shout out, or any way that people can contact you if they want to engage?
Yeah, my handle on Twitter is PPL_stand up.
Okay.
Yeah.
This PPL_stand up, all one word?
Yeah, so it's at people stand up. So yeah, PPL_stand up, all those two words are together. Yeah,
Okay.
And you'll find me on Twitter. I'm taking a social media detox right now, so it's the only way to reach me on social media. Everything else is sort of
Fair enough.
offline right now.
Sometimes people need that. There's a lot of polarization, a lot of division. But thanks for taking the time to come on our show. It's been great to hear your anecdotes and your discussion of what really happened, because I want to tell this story fairly, and I want to make sure that people understand it. So anyway, I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Thank you, Jeremy and Jesse.
Jamie, thanks.
Jamie, I'm so
Thanks,
sorry.
Candace, that's okay. Thank you though for
Okay.
coming on.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me. Take care.
All right. Bye, Candace.
Bye.
Jamie, any closing thoughts from you, or anything you want to?
To me, I just have really studied, narcissism, and when I see people acting really contemptuous and with vitriol and just a seething hatred for the other, and I think about all these terms and how they really connect to and I'm not saying that everybody has a narcissistic personality disorder, but there's a degree of narcissism in many different types of psychological constructs that seem to present in ways very similar to this. And so for me, when I'm hearing all these stories, it's like, I know this word narcissism gets thrown around a lot these days, but what it really is a person rejecting themselves and then constructing a false self, which needs to be reinforced from the outside. And that's a very basic definition of what narcissism is. And so a lot of narcissistic and egocentric and self-referential behavior is very centered on people needing this construct to be reinforced from somebody other than themselves, because it's a very fragile construct. And so when I see people that have rejected themselves and constructed a new self, to me, I see a really clear connection to that new self being necessary to be reinforced from the outside without causing distress to the individual. Because if people are very confident in themselves, they're sure of themselves, they know who they are, they're happy with who they are, they actually don't want to control others, and they actually mostly want to be left alone and just do their own thing. They don't actually want to control everybody around them. And so in our society, with the increase in narcissism, what I see is everybody having this extreme need to control the environment around them in order to become a mirror that they like. which is very odd because if people actually were confident in themselves, which many people claim to be, they wouldn't actually have the need for everybody to agree with them. And so what I see in this particular community is a use of force, violence, aggression, abuse, in order to demand that people comply and also agree with whatever construct people have made. And to me, that's very, very dangerous and actually does violate natural law and autonomy because like I said before, people should have the right to disagree and even to dislike. I mean, as long as people aren't causing harm, then people actually have a right to their own thoughts and feelings and opinions and beliefs. And so what I find really scary in Canada with all this hate speech law is, people seem really comfortable having laws and people regulating what people are allowed to think and feel. And to me, that can always change through history and culture. And I think particularly the LGBT community has experienced being on the other end of that coin in history. And so now that it's like flipped up to where their status has gone up to a way that, they're demanding that other people agree with them. Well, to me, that's exactly the same thing that was done to them in reverse. And so again, humans have failed to evolve past that because we need to stop just flipping the coin and humans oppressing each other, right? Like we need to evolve to synthesis above that. And so part of getting above that is to not become what you hate and what was done to you. And so I also draw parallels to this to the feminists. The original feminists were very legit in their what they were pointing out in wanting to have rights and be treated as equal. When I see the extreme end of feminism where there's actually, feminists acting patriarchal over non-feminists, then it completely, negated any work that was done because it's actually come full circle to actually become exactly what hates. And so, I take martial arts and stuff, and like that's one principle of, martial arts is to go with the flow of something and redirect that flow back against itself. And so I see these movements starting from really good places. And it seems like they kind of get to a peak and then they get harnessed and that energy gets redirected and turned right back around into what it was before. And so, like I said, personally, I've known people in the LGBT community since I was a little girl. I knew people. I've never had an issue with it. I've had people in my life, my entire life from this community. And they know that that I am an advocate for autonomy, and I would also stand up for their right to express anything that I even didn't personally agree with, because to me, that's where the battle's fought. It's not about the person being right, having the podium. It's about everybody having to be on the podium and taking turns on the podium, even if they're wrong. That's how I see freedom and autonomy. And I want that for everybody, not just specific groups and not just identity groups. And so I think that if I just had one message to send out to this community is to really start thinking about that. Because when you start saying that, you're right and therefore you have more rights because you're right, that actually is a really dangerous place to go, because like I said, that can change with culture. Like at one time the government was, it was in the DSM that it was illegal, to be in the LGBT community, right? It was considered a mental illness and actually illegal, right? So now that that's changed, it's like they want to make things like conversion therapy illegal or different, trying to whatever, stop children from doing things legal. And like, I think if people could just focus on that, like how scary it actually is to bring the law into any of these things, because that stuff can change over time. I think that all sides would agree that we don't want to have a system that gives that much authority over individuals and what they think and feel and believe. And so, allowing people to have a different voice, you should always stick up even for your enemies' rights, even if they're wrong, because rights are immutable. It doesn't matter if someone's in error, they still have a right to free speech. They still have a right to disagree. They have a right to their own thoughts and to their own feelings and to their own autonomy over their body. And so I think we can all agree that that's a right that's extended to everybody. Even the worst people in our society still should have that right, in my opinion. I don't think that your rights are on a sliding scale to, how politically correct you are or other things. It's like that's really where the battle's fought for rights, is to give them to the least of people because they're universal. And I think if people could think of it from that way, they might actually think twice about stopping anybody from speaking ever.
Very well said. And I think the example of attitudes changing is such a pertinent one, because there was a case I remember reading. It's an old case, but it was, I think, in the 1960s when somebody challenged the law against sodomy, basically arguing that there shouldn't be laws interfering with what people do in their own bedrooms. And the Supreme Court of Canada divided on that. I believe it was 5-4 at the time, but the 5 of the 9 members said that, well, obviously this is such immoral conduct that there has to be a law for this particular thing, and that these homosexual acts are clearly obscene, and it was just beyond debate that they were obscene. Of course, a couple of years later, Parliament came in and Pierre Trudeau said the state has no role in the bedrooms of the nation, and that law was repealed. But what the court said in, I think it was around 1967, late 60s anyway, what the court said then about homosexual acts would be hate speech now. If that same justice were to stand up on a street corner and say that same thing, that would be considered hate speech to try and justify a sodomy law. And of course, Canadians now, by and large, I think everybody would agree that there shouldn't be a sodomy law, and that the state, I would hope most Canadians would agree that the state should have no business in policing the interaction of consenting adults. But we now have a situation where the shoe is on the other foot, and there is, as you say, with conversion therapy, there is now a law that polices what adults can talk about, even seeking certain kinds of counseling services and certain kinds of perhaps pastoral services, or even advice from parents and family members. And people going through difficult conversations about gender. It's not always cut and dry what is going on, or what this person really wants, especially when you're dealing with a young person. And it seems like if somebody wants to transition and to be a gender they're not, it's fine to advise and counsel them to do that. But if somebody is really struggling with their gender identity, it's not okay to advise or counsel them to be the gender that they were born. And that's putting a real psychological strain on human beings, as telling them to build an identity without really probing why they want to do that, and who they really are, and how they truly feel. And I'm not a defender of conversion therapy. I think in a way the trans movement could be seen as a form of conversion therapy, because you have a lot of confused kids who are gay and lesbian who are maybe transitioning because they want to be straight. And that is a form of conversion therapy, which could be quite unhealthy. All I can say is that adults have to have autonomy. Adults have to be able to self-actualize and strive to be who they are. And sometimes they'll make good decisions, sometimes they'll make mistakes. But when it comes to kids, there's got to be a social trust involved in making sure that kids aren't being manipulated or abused. And obviously, if they're being subject to some kind of abusive conversion therapy, that's something that needs to be that's a concern. But if they're being subject to some kind of gender ideology in classrooms, that's also a concern. So it's not an easy issue. There's no cut and dry answer of how to deal with this, but there's a conversation that needs to be had, and different sides of that conversation should be able to relate to one another, do that respectfully, do that with civility. And it's just so disappointing to see so many people not able or not willing to do that. Like, just the anger in that crowd yesterday was worse than anything I've seen personally. And it makes me worried for our society, but I'm glad we're able to have these kinds of conversations. And I would put the offer out there to anybody who's watching, who's on the other side, who believes in SOGI, who believes in the gender curriculum that's currently going on in BC schools and in schools across the country. Come on and talk to us. We're not scary people. I have a legal background. Jamie has a social work background. We want to have conversations. We want to have respectful civil debates. And as long as you're willing to engage in those terms, we want guests on the show. We're willing to talk to you. So just keep that in mind. This is not a space for just sitting around and agreeing with one another. And we've got a few debates coming up. I've got some guests lined up who will be, I think, quite interesting on on issues around, we're talking about a potential debate on pornography and obscenity and where the line is around that. I'd like to also talk about healthcare. Again, there's a real debate to be had around public and private and types of healthcare, that the delivery mechanisms, and is our healthcare system really doing what it should be doing? So we've got a lot of good content lined up in the weeks and months to come. We're going to keep doing this show and hope that you will continue joining us. So again, I want to thank our guest, Candace Chappell. She has just advised me, and I will put it in the description, but her Twitter handle is indeed PPL_stand_up. So there is a second underscore there, but I'll put that in the description of the video. Also, she can be reached. She's asked for her email if people want to reach her to be placed as well. That's CandaceChappell@hotmail.com. if you have any interest in contacting her. And if you have any interest in contacting myself or Jamie, you can leave a comment on YouTube, or you can also message me via Twitter or X, as it's now called. I'm at Maddock JD, MADDOCK JD, all one word. So thanks for listening, everyone. Thank you, Jamie, as always, for your insights and perspectives. I think it's been a great conversation, and we will be talking to you all again very soon.